What you expose your brain to, whether or not it shapes your conscious thoughts, shapes the way that you perceive the world.
What you expose your brain to, and in general, but then in this specific case, there's a whole different meaning to what you expose your brain to.
Sure, yeah.
And
you mean neurofeedback?
yes,
like,
yeah,
deliberately.
neurofeedback, yeah, how you change your brain. You can
Yeah.
change the circumstances that the brain has to process.
Sure.
But there is some scope
Sure.
for changing the brain as well.
There is some research to suggest that where lithium, which is a naturally occurring salt, that's also sometimes used to treat depressive disorders,
Yes.
that where lithium is naturally occurring, there are fewer suicides because everybody's on a low dose. Right? Well, that's nothing when you talk about someone's mood that you would be tempted to investigate. Usually we say, oh, she had a good father and she
Sure.
went to a good school,
Yes.
or she had a rough breakup. What you're not going to do is look for a completely distinct environmental factor
Yeah.
to account for someone's behavior, but I think a lot of times those factors are at play.
We don't look for, generally as humans, we don't focus enough on the environmental factors, and we don't focus enough on the neurobiological
I don't think
factors.
so. Yeah.
It's again in the conversation with Maxi, you recognize that the default mode of consciousness, even that, like one's general way of thinking, is a product of a neurochemical cocktail. You really like your house drink.
I do. It's not perfect, but I like it.
Yeah, there are multiple moments in the book where you highlight like language is the most important thing for you, or thinking, the mind is the most important thing for you. And
Is it for you?
I think so. That's I wasn't expecting that. Thank you.
But is it?
Well, it's interesting as someone who is an academic, but then also is like a songwriter. I'm probably torn in a way that you probably relate to it a bit. I mean, I feel like the process of songwriting and communicating something that's emotionally true through music, that seems very different to me than the type of deliberation that we engage in. So you're celebrating deliberation at various moments in different ways throughout the book, from the would you rather stuff in the second or third chapter, you and the other members of Doomtree playing Would You Rather. Those are thought experiments. You refer to the thought experiments that as a philosophy student you would conduct. Those are just two of, I was counting, about 5 or 6 different ways in which deliberation and thought experiments come out. Even when you're sad, you highlight, it brings some consolation to kind of catch yourself in the act of thinking, to see your mind at work. In the chapter with the conversation with one of your favorite people, your brother Maxi, you discover through DNA testing. Well, what do you discover? What's the kind of the scary thing that you discover?
Yeah, so we did like the 23andMe kits, and it was initially just to have some conversational fodder, to figure out like, oh, who has a sweet tooth?
You're good at conversations.
Yeah.
Especially with Maxi, I'm sure.
Right, but discovered that while he was not at a meaningfully elevated risk for Alzheimer's, I was at a significantly elevated risk to develop Alzheimer's, which was arresting, exactly because A, anyone would be arrested by it, but B, because my mind is my favorite thing, and then C, because as single siblings, it might be the case that if there's caretaking to do, that would fall to him.
So then you find yourself trying to remember things from early life, because he's your younger brother.
He's younger by a few years,
5 years from the Sung children's work. You're a good pair though, because you find at the end of that chapter, you find yourself recalling things before his kind of memory gets switched on, with the idea that there's a possibility that he would be doing that for you later. In the present, given that we like thinking and deliberating, it provides an especially interesting thought experiment though, because as much as you've been saying throughout the book, things like, I don't know whether the rest of me would want to stick around if I lost the power of language or if I lost the power of thought. That in particular, and other moments in the book, give us cause to think, well, can I recalibrate? You recognize, for example, that what's good for the artist might not be best for the organism. Another deliberation moment is deciding to go for art chips instead of happiness chips.
Right.
That's an especially interesting predicament, I think, when you think of what's best for me is Dessa the performer, what's best for me is just the human being that I am. And as a child, you highlight coming back from India and dressing more plainly, and saying to your mother that you don't want to be tied to kind of ephemeral things to do with appearance. And she highlights, well, what if you couldn't sing in the way that you do?
And to be clear, I was like, I was in my early 20s, so I was in that insufferable collegiate part of your life where you're like telling other people how like morality works, like at Thanksgiving,
Yes.
Yeah, but I just thought, I don't want to be superficial and I don't want to be worried about beauty. And my mom was like, cool story. Everything you have is leaving. It's not just like your looks. You can sing now, and you won't always be able to. So does that mean you shouldn't sing at all? No.
So what if suddenly one couldn't sing? What if suddenly one's mind didn't function in the same way that one was used to? What if any of these things that one thinks of as central to one's sense of self suddenly wasn't there? One would want to find a way to survive. You say that maybe the word self has the same kind of meaning as the word here, where right now here is here. But maybe in a year, myself is something different. To what extent does that line of thinking lead you to question even the idea that you couldn't be the Dessa that you think of yourself as being if you didn't have the power of language or the power of thinking that you have?
I think I'd still want to check out. And I mean, I think we find that, now granted today, if I lost the ability to sing, I'm certainly not going to want to check out. If I lost the ability to use language, I think I would adapt. At some point, I wouldn't want to be honest. And we find that at end of life, people going, you know what, this quality of life, this still feels good. Yeah. And below this threshold, it doesn't feel good. So the question about self was, I think that's, that is something that I think about a lot in life and in the book, and maybe also because of the philosophical training. But presenting several ideas of how self might relate, like mind-body, as you mentioned, is something that I wonder about. Is mind a function of brain? Is mind a posture of brain? Are mind and brain two names for the same thing, but viewed through different lenses?
I like this. Can you explain what this is?
Yeah, I think so. I think that
your hand-fist analogy.
When we sit, we have a lap, but when I stand, I just got legs.
Yeah.
So maybe the mind is a posture that the brain can make. Like when we're dead, we don't have a mind, but we still have a brain. When we're alive, we have a mind and both. So maybe it's like hand is to fist, that a mind is something that a brain can make of itself, in the same way that a fist is something that a hand can make of itself. And
you're led to that manner of thinking initially in a philosophy class, but then you come back to it when you're grappling with the question of what is love something that exists in the brain. That makes it seem, so you're kind of rebutting the idea that just seems too cerebral. But the idea that it's too cerebral is, of course, a product of the mind-body dualism that we inherit from Descartes in the first place.
Right. I think that most of us, whether or not you've read Descartes, and we've butted up against his ideas. So like when you're in high school and you have to work with graph paper, some astronomy prof makes you go look at the moon for a month. We use the Cartesian plane.
Yes.
Descartes. He named that. Like we run against his ideas all the time. So even if you've never read a book by him or read a paragraph, like he's one of the minds that shaped our world. In the same way that even if you're not Christian, you might say something like poisonous apple, or like those symbols infuse our world.
These inherited metaphors that we're not even conscious of.
Like you don't even know where they came from. You never read the Bible, but you know what that means. What up from the dead, like Lazarus means, for example. For Descartes, we have a lot of his ideas and those of his cohorts running around shaping our worldview, which we might not have actually had pause to examine, because that's how paradigms work, So in his scenario, he insisted that mind and body were separate. And even now, just in casual conversation, if you and I are going out for beers and you're deciding what job to take, I might say, well, you got to decide. You're thinking go from your gut, or are you thinking, with your brain, or what does your heart say to do? Like I'm implying that there's this separation, right? That the cognition and the cool deliberation happens up here, and that all sorts of other and important and emotional thing happen below the neck.
Yes.
Which is just not true.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So we could
We
say,
don't need neuroscience to show that that's not true.
We don't. We do so much stuff with our bodies. No one part of our body gets to play only one role. Like, these are the hands that I type with, and there are also the hands that I box with. Because I've only got two. We've got a lot of stuff to do. So this idea that there's like one task associated with every part of your body is silly. And the idea that there's a distinction between mind and body is silly too.
What's the main event in the final chapter? Because you stop doing, midway through the main event, you go to New York to write some songs.
Yeah, in the very final chapter, I embark on a science/art/personal project.
Yes.
To see if I can map the love in my cortex and maybe remove it. Yeah.
You succeed.
So I want to be mindful and temper myself. So
Okay.
I worked with a clinician who does neurofeedback, which is something people might have seen on TV when you've got a lot of wires adhered to your scalp, essentially, measuring your brainwave. And I did notice that it felt different. Now, I want to be careful not to say, oh, I've scientifically demonstrated that love can be modified with neurofeedback, because I'm just a sample size of one. But I felt different.